On this day in 1964, South Africa's anti-apartheid hero Nelson Mandela begins his 27-year-long jail sentence for what they called his acts of resistance against the apartheid regime, which was backed by the US, UK and European countries. Recently, while waiting for a meeting in Nairobi, a European ambassador to Kenya saw a monkey at the window and said, our African partners have arrived. Possibly arriving late for the meeting. This kicked up a furore about racism and a diplomatic apology in the process. I have personally somehow gone beyond getting angry at such comments. The only reason I feel any concern is because dehumanizing people is always how big evils like discrimination, apartheid, slavery and genocide were able to be committed. They first started by dehumanizing their victims. So this kind of insult is actually very common wherever black people are not around, and therefore we cannot imagine the true massive scale of the plague of racism and how it easily recruits new bigots just by people remaining silent to racist comments. Let us be very clear about one thing. I estimate that we only see about 1% of acts of racism globally. The humongous vastness of the iceberg's underbelly goes unreported. And in my experience, the only reason we know about this case is because either an African was in the room and the ambassador had not noticed that before he spoke, or because a white person refused to be forced to be an accomplice to the ambassador's racism. Basically, whoever this person is, he or she refused to be unsolicitedly recruited into a fraternity of hate by remaining silent, and thus spoke out as a way of getting out of the ambassador's bigotry trap. It is this speaking out, this simple refusal to be a forced accomplice to hate speech that will end racism. It is this simple mechanism that should be taught to children in Europe, America, Asia, the Middle East, in even African schools. Speak out against any racist hate speech around you. This is what the children should be told. I call on international organizations that advocate against racism to include the refusal to remain silent in educational curriculums and programs around the world. Fighting racism. The younger the children learn to not be silent, the more societies stop racism in its tracks, and the better the world these very children will grow up in. Let us first remember the context in which this Romanian ambassador, actually, yes, because he's a European Union ambassador from Romania, the context in which his statement is happening. These are the countries that invited Ukrainians to Europe but blocked African refugees. When they said that Ukrainian grain needed to reach Africa to avoid a humanitarian catastrophe, in reality, the grain was then all shipped to themselves in the European Union. They also hoarded all the oil from the international market, diverting Africa's fuel supplies and its supply chain to themselves in Europe, creating fuel shortages and high fuel prices in Africa. And on top of that, they are forcing, not kindly requesting, they are arm-twisting Africans to support them in the war in Ukraine. Obviously, we are dealing with narcissistic countries that need to know what we are seeing of their behavioral nature from our mud huts here in Africa. Clearly, they need to learn basic humane values and change their heinous historic culture of trying to organize a total lynching of those they hate and ostracizing those who do not join them in their lynching of those they hate. On the other hand, those African colleagues that the European ambassador was talking about, what is it that they regularly do that can be associated with the monkey as a behavioral pattern? Thank you.